When my son pushed me and told me to go away, I knew what to do next. I made a phone call that changed everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I suppose every mother makes sacrifices for her children, but mine were not small ones. They were heavy, like the kind you carry in your bones long after the muscles have given out. The house was the biggest one. A house worth $250,000, sitting proud and square on its plot of land. I still remember the first day I walked through it with the realtor. The floors creaked in places, the kitchen needed tearing out, the roof shingles were curled and brittle, but I didn't see flaws. I saw a dream. My son's dream. You see, when I was a girl, we never had a proper home. Just rentals, one after another, each a little more worn than the last. I grew up knowing the sound of someone else's footsteps over my head, the smell of a landlord's paint covering our walls before the next family came in. My daddy used to say, "One day we'll have a place of our own." But that day never came for him. When I married and raised my son, I told myself he'd never know that feeling of rootlessness, of being borrowed space in someone else's life. So when he and his wife started talking about needing a bigger place for the children, I didn't think twice. The bank clerk raised her eyebrows when she looked at my papers. "At your age, ma'am? A 30-year mortgage?" She said it gently, but I could hear the doubt. I straightened my back and told her I'd make it work. And I did. $3,200 every month like clockwork. Some months I skipped things for myself. Dental appointments, a new pair of shoes, even the little trips with my church ladies, but I never missed that payment. And oh, the repairs. Houses are like babies. You bring them home and suddenly you realize just how much tending they need. The roof was the first to go, $9,000 gone in a blink. Then the pipes burst one winter, and I had to call in a crew to dig half the yard. The bill was so high I had to sit down before I signed the check. The windows rattled in their frames every time the wind blew, so I had them replaced with double panes. One thing after another, until when I finally counted, I had poured in $110,000 just in repairs. My hands shook when I wrote that last check to the contractor who patched the basement walls. He smiled, said, "Now this place will stand another 100 years." I nodded, but in truth I was thinking about the 100 years of myself I had already given away. Still, every time I saw my son's children running down the stairs, their socks sliding on the polished wood, or when I heard the sound of family laughter filling the rooms on holidays, I told myself it was worth it. Worth every dollar, every sleepless night worrying if I'd make the payment, every ache in my knees from taking side jobs cleaning or sewing to cover the bills. That house was my gift. My legacy. My son used to say, "Mom, you don't need to do all this." But I saw the light in his eyes when he talked about his house, the backyard where he'd put up a swing set, the dining room where Thanksgiving dinners would stretch late into the evening. I thought, let him think it's his. Someday it will be anyway. It's a funny thing, though, how sacrifice changes a person. At first, it feels noble, even sweet, like you're part of something larger than yourself. But after a while, when nobody notices, when nobody says thank you, when the house creaks and groans and you're the only one listening, it begins to feel like a weight. I'd walk through that kitchen sometimes, brushing crumbs into my palm after supper, and I'd think if these walls could talk, they'd speak my name, not his. Because it was my back that kept them upright. My money that sealed the cracks. My signature on those papers at the bank. I never told my son about the nights I lay awake wondering if I'd overdone it, if I'd ruined what little comfort I had left in my own old age. I never told him about the times I skipped meals so I could send in that exact $3,200 before the deadline. Mothers don't tell those things. We keep them inside, wrapped in silence, because we don't want to weigh our children down. But in the stillness of the night, when the house creaked and the furnace hummed, I used to whisper to myself, "This is the house of sacrifice." A house built not on stone, but on a mother's devotion, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, year after year. And though it was meant for them, It was my blood running through its beams, my sweat under its roof. Maybe that's why it hurt so much later, when I realized they didn't see it that way at all. They thought it was theirs, simply theirs, as if my sacrifice was nothing but air. But that part of the story comes later. For now, I want you to understand, before anything else, that this house was never just wood and plaster. It was me. It was my life poured out for my son and his family. And I thought, oh, how foolishly I thought, that love like that would always be returned. The morning I left for Sitno, the sky was pale blue, the kind that promises a fair day. I had been awake since 4 o'clock, fussing over my suitcase. At my age, fussing is half the journey. You lay out your stockings, refold your blouses, tuck in a sweater you might not even need, but it makes you feel prepared. I must have zipped and unzipped that suitcase 3 times before I finally sat down and told myself it was enough. I packed carefully, not just clothes but little touches of myself. 2 loaves of poppy seed bread, wrapped in wax paper and tied with string, went right on top. I had baked them the day before, the house smelling sweet and nutty all afternoon. My daughter-in-law once said she liked it, though it's been years since she asked me to make anything. Still, I thought it might soften her mood. Beside it, I placed a jar of my strawberry jam, bright red and thick, the kind that catches the light in the morning sun. I smiled, thinking how my grandchildren might like it on their toast. Children always love jam. The bus ticket sat folded in my purse, a crisp reminder of the money I had spent. Traveling isn't cheap these days, but I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was being with family. I wanted to see my son, to hug the grandchildren, to hear the kind of laughter that only a full house can hold. My knees ached, my back was tired, but my heart was light. At the bus station, I sat on a wooden bench with my suitcase by my side. Around me, people bustled about. Students with backpacks, businessmen with briefcases, mothers tugging little ones by the hand. I watched them all and thought about how many journeys begin just like this, with a suitcase and a little hope tucked inside it. When the bus finally pulled up, its engine grumbling and brakes squealing, I felt a swell of excitement. Sitno. I was on my way. The ride was long, but I didn't mind. I sat by the window and let the fields roll past. The land stretched out, golden with late summer, broken now and then by clusters of trees or a farmhouse standing stubbornly against the wind. I thought about my younger years when a trip like this would have been impossible. We didn't have the money for travel back then. Everything was used for rent, groceries, keeping the lights on. Maybe that's why I give so freely now, why I sacrifice for that house. I wanted my son to live in a way I never could. I wanted him to have roots that didn't shift from one place to the next. As the bus rattled along, I imagined the welcome waiting for me. The children running into my arms, my son smiling as he took my bag, my daughter-in-law perhaps pouring me a cup of tea. I pictured us all gathered around the table talking about school, work, the little things that make a family. I held on to that picture tightly. It warmed me more than the sun streaming through the dusty window. We stopped once at a roadside cafe. I stretched my legs and bought myself a cup of coffee, weak but hot, and a slice of apple pie. It wasn't as good as homemade, but I ate it slowly, savoring each bite as if it were part of the journey itself. I listened to other travelers talking, farmers discussing prices, a young couple planning their wedding, a grandmother like me telling a stranger about her grandchildren. I thought about how soon I'd be telling my own stories face to face, not just into the air. Back on the bus, the hours passed. I dozed a little, woke when the bus bumped over rough roads, then dozed again. When the driver finally called out, "Sitno," my heart leapt. I gathered my things, smoothed my dress, and dabbed a bit of powder on my face from the compact I always carry. My hands trembled slightly, not from age but from excitement. The Sitno bus station was small, just a handful of benches and a faded timetable pinned to the wall. I stepped down with my suitcase and looked around, expecting to see familiar faces. For a moment, all I saw were strangers. A young boy chasing a dog, an old man reading a newspaper, a woman hurrying off with a bag of groceries. My heart beat faster. Where were they? And then I saw them. My son walking quickly, his wife just behind him, the children darting around their legs. Relief flooded me. I raised my hand and called out, "Over here!" They didn't wave back, but they were coming closer, and that was enough for me. I stood straighter, smoothed the front of my coat, and clutched the poppy seed bread and jam. As they approached, I studied them. My son looked older than I remembered. Lines etched across his forehead, his shoulders heavier. My daughter-in-law was neat as always, her hair pulled back, her mouth tight in a line that wasn't quite a smile. The children moved quickly, full of restless energy, their voices high and sharp. My chest ached with longing. How I wanted to scoop them into my arms, kiss their cheeks, and tell them how much I had missed them. When they reached me, my son gave me a quick hug, more polite than warm. My daughter-in-law brushed my cheek with hers, barely a touch. The children glanced at me, then turned back to their father, tugging at his sleeve. My son cleared his throat. "Let's get going, Mom," he said. "It's been a long day." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I followed them out of the station, my suitcase bumping along behind me. The ride to their house was quiet. I sat in the back seat, watching the town pass by through the window. Sitno looked much the same as I remembered. Shops with faded signs, narrow streets lined with old houses, laundry fluttering on clotheslines. But my thoughts were not on the town. They were on the house. The house. My house, though no one would call it that. The place I had mortgaged, repaired, poured my savings into. The place I believed would hold us all together. As the car turned onto the familiar street, my heart pounded. There it was, standing tall, its shutters freshly painted, flowers blooming in the beds out front. We pulled into the driveway. My son opened the door, the children spilled out, and my daughter-in-law walked briskly ahead. I gathered my things and stepped out slowly, gazing at the house, the weight of years of sacrifice pressing against me. I had arrived. When I stepped into the house, I had that same feeling I always did, like I should take my shoes off and whisper. It wasn't because it was anyone else's house. After all, the deed still had my name. It was because I had worked so hard for those walls, scrubbed so deep into my soul to keep them standing, that I couldn't help but treat them with reverence. But the reverence wasn't shared. The children ran up the stairs, shoes clattering against the polished wood I had paid to refinish. My son walked ahead, tossing his keys onto the counter with the same careless thud he used to make as a teenager when he came home from school. My daughter-in-law didn't say welcome, or it's good to see you. She simply moved into the kitchen, glanced at the bread and jam I had carried all the way from home, and set them down beside a stack of store-bought groceries. I stood in the doorway with my suitcase, waiting for someone to notice me, to ask if I needed to sit down, to offer me a glass of water. No one did. Finally, I cleared my throat and asked softly, "Where should I put my things?" "Oh," my daughter-in-law said, as if she had only just remembered I was there. "Just leave it in the hall for now." So I did. My suitcase sat there like an unwanted guest, just like me. The afternoon passed in a blur of small humiliations. I tried to sit with the children in the living room, but they hardly looked up from their screens. Once, when I asked what game they were playing, my grandson shrugged without answering. My granddaughter gave me a smile, quick and distracted, before turning back to the flashing lights on her tablet. I reminded myself they were young, that times were different now, but the truth was it hurt. I remembered sitting on the floor with them years earlier, building castles out of blocks, their laughter like bells around me. Now I was invisible. At dinner, the table was set beautifully, I'll give them that. My daughter-in-law always had a knack for appearances. But when the food was served, the conversation flowed over me like water around a rock. They talked about school assignments, a new project at my son's office, an upcoming vacation they were planning. I sat with my hands folded, nodding, waiting for a chance to join. Once I mentioned how Sitno had changed since I last visited. No one responded. My words fell flat, and the conversation kept rolling on without me. I watched them all, my son laughing at something his wife said, the children bickering over who got the last role. And I felt like I had slipped out of focus, like one of those faded photographs where the background blurs and the edges dissolve. I was there, but I wasn't in it. After dinner, I offered to help clear the table. My daughter-in-law hesitated, then said, "It's all right, we've got it." The way she said "we" cut me. There was no "we" that included me. So I stood awkwardly by while she and the children carried plates away, my hands empty, my heart heavy. It was late when I finally asked about sleeping arrangements. I had assumed there would be a corner for me, a spare room, a sofa, something. After all, it was my house. Surely there was space. My son and his wife exchanged a glance, that silent conversation married couples have when they're about to say something they know will sting. "Well, Mom," my son began slowly, "the rooms are pretty full right now. The kids each have their own, and we've got some things stored in the guest room." He cleared his throat. "It might be better if you stayed in a hotel, just for the night." The words knocked the breath out of me. A hotel? In Sitno? While my house stood right there behind him. My house, for which I had paid $3,200 every month without fail, for which I had written checks until my hands cramped, into which I had poured $110,000 in repairs. No place for me. I wanted to shout. I wanted to cry. Instead, I felt my lips pull into a small, tight smile. "Of course," I said quietly. "If that's easier." My son looked relieved. Relieved. As if I had spared him an inconvenience. My daughter-in-law nodded briskly, already reaching for her phone to call a cab. The children didn't even look up. When the taxi arrived, I lifted my suitcase, the one that had sat all day ignored in the hall, and carried it back out the front door. The night air in Sitno was cool, sharp against my cheeks. As we pulled away, I looked back at the house. The windows glowed warmly, golden rectangles against the dark. A family sat inside, full and alive, while I rode alone through the streets. In the hotel room, the sheets were thin, the air smelled faintly of dust, and the radiator clanked every few minutes. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my suitcase. My knees ached from the day, my back from the bus ride, but it was my heart that hurt most of all. I thought of the sacrifices, the years, the money, the love poured into that house. And I thought of how easily they had pushed me aside, how little space I occupied in the world I had built for them. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator clank. Invisible. That was the word that kept circling in my mind. I had come to Sitno full of hope, and within hours I had vanished in their eyes. A stranger in my own family. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of that radiator in the hotel. It clanked and hissed like an old kettle boiling over, then went silent, only to start up again just as I was about to drift off. But truth be told, it wasn't the noise that kept me awake. It was the heaviness inside me, pressing down on my chest, making the air feel thick and sharp all at once. I lay there in the stiff bed, staring up at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the plaster. Every now and then a car would pass outside, headlights sweeping across the thin curtains. The world kept moving, but I felt stuck, like a stone at the bottom of a fast river, battered but unmoved. Invisible. That word echoed in my head. I had spent the day watching my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren live as though I weren't even there. No questions about my journey, no seat kept warm for me at their table, no corner saved for me to lay my head. And then the final insult. It might be better if you stayed in a hotel. Better for them, perhaps. Never mind what it meant for me. I thought of my sacrifices one by one, as if counting beads on a rosary. The $250,000 mortgage I had signed, promising away years of my life to make sure they had a proper roof. The $3,200 check I wrote every month steady as the sunrise. The $110,000 I poured into repairs, each dollar buying them comfort, safety, beauty. And then I thought of how little of me they saw. Not even a thank you. Not even a we're glad you're here. I remembered when my son was small. How he used to curl against me on the sofa, sticky fingers from a popsicle, eyes wide as I read him stories. Back then I was his whole world. He needed me. He wanted me. I never doubted my place. Now in this lonely hotel room, I realized my place had been erased. It hurt. Oh, it hurt more than I can put into words. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred. Something steadier, quieter, but stronger. A kind of clarity. I had told myself for years that love was enough. That if I gave everything, my time, my money, my strength, it would come back to me in the form of gratitude, care, maybe just a little respect. But love without respect is like water poured into a sieve. No matter how much you give, it slips through, leaving you empty. That night, I asked myself a question I had never dared ask before. What if I stopped giving? The thought startled me. For so long, sacrifice had been my way of loving, my language. Without it, who was I? A mother is supposed to endure, to bear the weight. But lying there in that hard bed, my knee aching from travel and my heart bruised from rejection, I saw the truth. They weren't seeing my sacrifice as love. They were seeing it as duty, obligation, something I owed them, not something I had chosen to give. And if they saw it that way, then maybe I was allowed to see it differently too. I thought of the deed papers back home tucked away in my desk. I still held the reins. I had never signed the house over completely, though my son assumed it was his. That house was still mine on paper, as much as it had always been mine in sacrifice. I had a choice. For the first time in years I realized I had a choice. I sat up then, pulled the thin blanket around my shoulders, and let the clarity settle in. Tomorrow I would go back. I would not beg for a seat at their table or a corner in their home. I would not keep pouring myself out for people who treated me like an afterthought. Tomorrow I would speak plainly. Either they would acknowledge what I had given, every dollar, every hour, every ounce of myself, and take on the responsibility themselves, or they would leave. I wouldn't re-register the house into their names. I wouldn't let them erase me from my own sacrifice. For the first time in many nights, I felt a strange sort of calm. Not happiness, no, but a steadiness, like I had found my footing after years of stumbling. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap, sat on the edge of the bed and whispered aloud, "Enough is enough." The radiator clanked again, as if in agreement. I thought of the morning ahead. I would walk back into that house, not as the invisible guest, not as the woman politely shuffled aside, but as the one who held the keys, the one who had built the very foundation beneath their feet. I would tell my son the truth he had long ignored. Love doesn't mean slavery, and respect is not optional. The night was long. I slept in short bursts, dreams filled with half-remembered arguments and echoes of children's laughter. But every time I woke, the decision was still there, clear as day. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. By dawn, a pale gray light seeped through the curtains. I rose slowly, washed my face, brushed my hair, and dressed with care. My hands trembled a little, but my resolve did not. I zipped my suitcase, lifted it with both hands, and whispered to myself once more, "Enough." And with that, I was ready to face the day and my son. Morning light has a way of stripping away illusions. It doesn't soften or flatter. It just shows things as they are. That next morning, as I left the hotel and walked toward the house, I felt as though the light itself was walking beside me, sharpening my resolve with every step. My knee ached from the fall the day before, but I held my head high. I had spent the night replaying all those years of sacrifice, all those mortgage payments, all those repairs, and it had led me to one simple truth. I would not be dismissed any longer. When I reached the house, the windows were glowing with that same golden warmth I had admired from the taxi the night before. It looked so peaceful, so welcoming, but I knew better now. A house doesn't tell you what it shelters. It doesn't show you the cold shoulders and careless words, the way a mother can be erased in her own gift. I rang the bell. My son opened the door, his face surprised. "Mom," he said, "you're back early. Did you sleep well?" There was no warmth in his eyes, only a polite shield. Behind him, I saw the children at the table, cereal bowls clinking, and my daughter-in-law moving briskly about the kitchen, her back to me. For a moment I thought of turning away, of swallowing my words and pretending nothing had happened. But then I remembered the radiator clanking in the hotel room, the words I had whispered to myself. Enough is enough. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. My son closed the door behind me, still looking puzzled. "Mom, is something wrong?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Something is very wrong. And it has been wrong for a long time." The children quieted, their spoons frozen mid-air. My daughter-in-law paused, though she didn't turn around. My son shifted uneasily, as if bracing himself. I set my suitcase down in the hallway and faced him squarely. "I won't be invisible in this house anymore. I won't be treated like a guest when I am the one who gave you this roof. I paid for it every month, $3,200 without fail. I poured $110,000 into repairs, to make it safe, to make it beautiful. I took on a mortgage for you so your children would grow up with something I never had. A real home. And yet last night you told me there was no place for me here." He opened his mouth, but I held up my hand. "No. You will listen now. Either you take responsibility, return the money I invested and continue paying for the house yourself, or you move out. I will not re-register this house into your name. Not now. Not ever, unless you prove you can respect what I've given." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. My son stared at me, his jaw tight. My daughter-in-law finally turned, her face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. The children exchanged nervous glances, not understanding the weight of what had just been spoken. My son's voice, when it came, was low and sharp. "Mom, you can't be serious. This is our home. The kids live here. You can't just threaten us like that." "I am not threatening you," I said quietly. "I am telling you the truth. The house is mine. Legally, it is mine. I have given everything to make it yours in practice, but if I am not wanted here, if I am nothing more than a burden to you, then I will not give away the last piece of power I hold. Either you step up and take it on yourself or you step out. Those are the choices." His face reddened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "After everything I've done," he muttered. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, though I swallowed it. "After everything you've done? Tell me, what have you done, son? Who signed the checks? Who dealt with the contractors, the leaks, the repairs? Who worked extra shifts and went without so that this house could stand? You enjoy the fruits, yes, but the roots are mine. Don't forget that." My daughter-in-law spoke then, her voice sharp. "You're being unfair. We've built our life here. You can't just take it away. Life built on someone else's sacrifice is not life. It is dependence," I answered. My voice shook a little, but I didn't let it falter. "I love you, but love doesn't mean letting myself be erased. Not anymore." For a moment no one moved. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. My son's eyes burned into mine, searching, maybe for weakness, maybe for hesitation. But I gave him none. I stood as tall as my tired bones would allow, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. He stepped closer, his eyes dark. "You owe me, Mom. You hear me? You owe me. For everything. For raising me the way you did, for not giving me more when I was younger, for—" His words tangled into anger, sharp and cutting. Something inside me snapped. "I owe you," I said, my voice rising. "I gave you my life. I gave you a home when I never had one. I gave you every dollar, every ounce of strength. Don't you dare stand there and tell me I owe you." His face flushed red, his hands tightening into fists. Before I could take another breath, he shoved me hard. I stumbled back, my knee catching the edge of the step, and I went down. The pain shot through me like fire, white-hot and blinding. I gasped, clutching at my leg. For a moment, the room went silent except for my ragged breathing. I looked up at him, expecting some flicker of remorse, some sign that he realized what he'd done. But his face was stone cold. "You brought this on yourself," he said flatly. "You're the one who decided to start trouble. This is my house now. I don't care what the papers say." Tears pricked at my eyes, not from the pain in my knee, though that was bad enough, but from the sheer cruelty of his words. This was my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed better, the boy for whom I had sacrificed everything. And now he was standing over me, not with concern but with disdain. I struggled to sit up, my hands shaking. "You don't know what you're saying," I whispered. "Oh, I know," he snapped. "You've been controlling me my whole life. Well, it ends now. You're done. You're out. This is mine." I wanted to argue, to remind him of the deed, the mortgage, the money. But what good were facts in the face of such hardness? My son wasn't listening, not to reason, not to love. He had built a story in his head, and in that story I was the villain. With great effort I pulled myself up, leaning heavily on the wall. My knee throbbed, every step sending sparks of pain through me. But I would not cry in front of him. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. "I'll be gone," I said quietly, steadying myself. "But don't mistake my leaving for weakness. You think this house is yours, but it isn't. And one day you'll see just how wrong you are." His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the hall, my body aching, my heart torn. I limped out of the house, the cool air striking my face like a blessing after the suffocating heaviness inside. My knee screamed with each step, but my resolve only grew stronger. He thought he had won, thought he had pushed me aside for good. But he didn't know me as well as he believed. I had endured worse storms in my life, and each one had only made me stronger. That night, as I sat with ice pressed against my swollen knee, I let the tears come at last. Not for the pain in my body, but for the loss of something deeper, the loss of the son I thought I knew. The boy I had loved had grown into a man who could look his mother in the eye, shove her to the ground, and claim she owed him. That grief was heavier than any mortgage, any repair, any burden I had carried before. But even as the tears fell, a flame sparked inside me. Betrayal may have knocked me down, but it would not keep me down. I had the deed. I had the law. I had the truth. And I would use them. He thought he had erased me. But I was far from erased. The morning after he pushed me, I woke with my knee swollen, my body stiff, and my heart sore in ways I cannot fully describe. But alongside the ache sat something else, determination. A kind of quiet steel had settled into me overnight. I had spent too many years giving, sacrificing, hoping my love would be enough. But the moment my son shoved me, I realized love had no place in his eyes anymore. Not the kind that carried respect, at least. And so, I did what I had always done when life turned cruel. I got practical. I called the bank first. My voice trembled at the start, but I steadied it, explaining the situation clearly. The woman on the other end spoke kindly, but she didn't sugarcoat the truth. The house was still mine, every brick and beam. The deed bore my name. If I wanted to sell, I could. If I wanted to transfer, I could. My son had no claim except the one I had allowed him. When I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and let the truth sink in. All these years I had thought of the house as theirs, a gift I'd already given. But it wasn't. It was mine until I said otherwise. Mine. And for the first time that word didn't feel selfish. Felt like justice. I made a second call to a realtor in town. A nice young woman, polite, eager, full of energy. She agreed to meet me that very afternoon. My knee throbbed as I hobbled down the steps to greet her, but I held my head high. She walked through the house with sharp eyes, complimenting the fresh paint, the solid repairs, the improvements I had poured my savings into. By the time she left, I had signed the papers. The house was officially on the market. That evening, I sat by the window with the listing brochure in my hands. There it was, photographs of the home I had bled for, now priced to bring me not just my money back, but a profit. Profit? I almost laughed at the irony. My son thought he had taken everything from me, but in truth, he had only cleared the path for me to reclaim more than I ever imagined. I imagined him pacing the kitchen, shouting to his wife about betrayal, about how unfair it all was. Perhaps he thought anger would frighten me into backing down, as it always had before. But he didn't understand. When he laid hands on me, when he shoved me like I was nothing, he had burned the last bridge between us. There was no fear left in me, only resolve. Days passed and the realtor brought potential buyers through. I stayed nearby, watching quietly as families walked the halls, admiring the light, measuring the rooms. Each pair of footsteps echoed with possibility. The house would no longer be a cage for me, nor a throne for my ungrateful son. It would be someone else's fresh start and mine as well. One evening after another showing, I sat in my chair and allowed myself to breathe a little easier. I thought back to that hotel room where I had whispered, "Enough is enough." Now those words had flesh and bone. They had become deeds, signatures, decisions. And though my body still carried bruises, my spirit felt unbroken for the first time in years. I thought, too, of what would happen when the sale went through. How he would rage, how he would curse me. Perhaps he would stand in the yard with his fists clenched, shouting at the injustice of it all. But the law would be on my side. The papers would be signed, the money secured, and the keys handed over to new owners. He could wave a stick in protest, but it would not change the truth. For years I had told myself that my role was to give, to bend, to sacrifice without end. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We go without so our children may have. But I had forgotten something important. Sacrifice only has meaning when it is honored. Without honor, it becomes servitude. And servitude was not the legacy I wanted to leave behind. By choosing to sell, I wasn't just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming my worth. That night, as I set the realtor's brochure on the table and turned off the light, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for my son, not yet. My heart was too sore for that. But for myself. A prayer for strength, for peace, for the courage to walk through the fire without being consumed. And deep down I knew I had already begun. The first call came early in the morning, before I'd even had my tea. I looked at the screen, saw his name, and my heart gave a little twist. For one fleeting second I thought maybe, just maybe, it was different this time. Maybe he was calling to say he was sorry, that he had thought about my words, that he had realized the truth. But deep down I knew better. Apologies don't come from lips that have already denied your worth. They come from hearts that still feel love. And my son's heart, at least for now, had grown hard. I set the phone back on the table and let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. By noon I counted 9 missed calls, all from him. Each time I sat perfectly still, listening to the vibration hum against the wood. My hands folded in my lap. I imagined his voice. Angry, pleading, perhaps demanding. I didn't need to hear it to know the shape of his words. In the past I would have answered. I would have rushed to soothe him, to explain myself, to bend and fold until he was satisfied. But not anymore. This silence was my answer, and it was louder than anything I could have said. By evening the calls had reached 20. My phone sat heavy on the nightstand, glowing each time his name appeared. I turned it face down and opened my book, though I couldn't read more than a sentence at a time. My mind kept drifting back to him, pacing the kitchen, raising his voice, slamming his hand against the counter. He was used to having the last word, and now I had taken that from him. It wasn't easy, this silence. A mother's instinct is to respond, to comfort, to keep the lines open no matter how frayed they become. There were moments when I nearly reached for the phone, ready to break the stillness. But then I would remember the push, the cold words, the way he had told me I owed him. And the strength would return. I began to notice how quiet my house was. No children's laughter, no hurried footsteps, no hum of a busy family life. At first, the stillness pressed in heavy and sharp. But after a while, I began to hear something else within it, peace. For the first time in years, my days weren't filled with the noise of others' demands. I made my tea slowly, sipped it while looking out the window at the sparrows in the yard, and felt no rush to answer anyone. The realtor called, her cheerful voice a contrast to the silence that otherwise filled my rooms. She told me there was interest, serious buyers already making offers. My heart lifted, not out of spite but out of relief. The house was no longer a trap binding me to ungratefulness. It was becoming a door opening toward freedom. Meanwhile, his calls didn't stop. They came at odd hours, early morning, late at night, even during church service on Sunday. I let them all go unanswered. Each ring was a test, and each silence was a victory. Neighbors began to notice the for sale sign in the yard. A few asked me about it, their brows raised in surprise. I smiled and said simply, "It's time." They didn't press further, and I was grateful. Some things don't need retelling to everyone. They live best in the quiet places of the heart. At night, lying in bed, I sometimes thought about the sound of his voice when he was little. The way he used to call out, "Mom!" with joy, not bitterness. I thought about the countless times I had picked up the phone in the past, rushing to his aid, no matter how small the problem. The silence between us now wasn't born from lack of love. It was born from too much love given and none returned. One evening, as the phone buzzed again on the table, I whispered aloud, "I have nothing left to say." And in that moment I realized I wasn't just talking about the phone. I had nothing left to explain, no justification left to give, no plea left to make. My silence wasn't emptiness. It was full of boundaries, full of strength, full of a mother who had finally chosen herself. When the 21st call came, I turned the phone off entirely. The house grew still, utterly quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I listened to that steady rhythm and let it anchor me. Life goes on, tick by tick, with or without the clamor of voices that once filled it. And in the quiet, I began to find something I hadn't known I was missing. Peace of mind. The day the new tenants arrived, the air felt different, charged with a kind of finality. I had signed the papers, the money had cleared, and the house no longer belonged to me. Not in deed, not in burden. Soon it would belong to a new family, one who had looked at it with bright eyes and hope in their voices. For me, it was the closing of a chapter one had carried too long. Still, my heart thudded in my chest as I walked up the path beside them, my cane tapping lightly against the stones. The family was kind. A young couple with a baby, their faces full of that eager joy I once remembered in myself when I first dreamed of a home. They carried flowers, as if stepping into a future worth celebrating. But standing on the porch was my son. He had been waiting, I could tell by the set of his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. In his hand he held a stick, not much more than an old broom handle, but he gripped it like a weapon. His eyes burned when they landed on me, and then slid past to the strangers behind me. "You're not coming in," he barked. His voice was rough, louder than necessary, carrying across the street. "This is my house. Nobody's taking it from me." The young couple froze, exchanging uneasy glances. The baby stirred in its blanket, letting out a small cry. I felt my stomach twist, but I stepped forward anyway, my cane planted firm on the ground. "This isn't your house," I said, my voice calm but clear. "It was mine, and now it belongs to them." You've known this day was coming. He shook his head violently, raising the stick in front of him like a guardrail. No. You think you can push me out? You think you can humiliate me like this? Over my dead body. The words cut sharper than the air. For a moment I saw not the man he had become, but the little boy he once was, frustrated, angry, lashing out because he didn't understand the world. But this was no child's tantrum. This was a grown man, refusing to let go of what was never truly his. The couple stepped back, fear flickering in their eyes. I raised my hand gently, signaling them to stay behind me. My heart pounded, but I refused to flinch. You brought this on yourself, I said steadily. I gave you every chance to do right, to respect what was given, to carry the weight yourself. Instead, you pushed me aside. You pushed me down. And now you're trying to push away the truth. But truth doesn't bend, son. It doesn't care how loud you shout. He advanced a step, the stick gripped tighter. My knees trembled, but I didn't move. I had faced storms before, and I would not yield now. Then came the flashing lights. A police car pulled up at the curb, quiet at first, then with a short, sharp siren burst that cut through the tension like a knife. 2 officers stepped out, their presence solid and immovable. What's going on here? One asked, his gaze sharp as it landed on my son and the raised stick. She's selling my house, my son shouted, his voice cracking with rage. They're trying to throw me out. The officer's eyes shifted to me, then to the couple, then back to my son. Calmly, I handed over the documents, the signed sale papers, the deed transfers, every official proof needed. The officer skimmed them quickly, then gave a curt nod. This property now belongs to them, he said firmly. You have no legal right to remain. My son's face went red, his grip on the stick tightening. I'm not leaving, he spat. This is my home. The officers moved closer, their voices calm but unyielding. Sir, put the stick down. Now. For a moment I feared he wouldn't. That he would swing it, that he would make this scene uglier than it already was. But at last, with a guttural sound of frustration, he dropped it to the ground. The clatter echoed across the porch like a bell tolling the end of something. The officers guided him down the steps, their hands firm on his arms. He struggled, muttering curses, his voice ragged with fury. Then came the words I never thought I'd hear directed at my son. You're being fined for disorderly conduct. Hooliganism won't be tolerated. The shame on his face then was fierce, but it was not the shame of remorse. It was the shame of being caught, of being powerless. I watched, my heart aching, but I didn't intervene. Not this time. When the officers finally led him away, the air seemed to settle. The young couple stepped forward hesitantly, their eyes wide but relieved. I smiled at them, though my smile carried years of sorrow behind it. Go on, I said softly. This is your home now. May it bring you joy. They crossed the threshold, carrying their baby and their flowers. I lingered for a moment on the porch, resting my hand against the doorframe. My house, my sacrifice, my battlefield, and now my freedom. As I turned to leave, my cane tapping against the steps, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. I had lost a son that day, not by death but by choice. His choices. Yet in losing him, I had gained something I hadn't felt in years, dignity. And dignity, I realized, was worth more than any house. When it was all over, the papers signed, the keys handed over, the police reports filed, I returned to my own small house. Not the big one with its polished wood and freshly painted walls, but my own place, the one that had stood quietly waiting for me all along. I remember sitting down at my kitchen table that evening, the soft tick of the clock filling the silence. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. Felt like peace. No more tiptoeing around sharp words. No more waiting for gratitude that never came. No more clinging to the hope that love would look different tomorrow. I had chosen dignity, and it sat beside me like an old friend. But I wasn't as alone as I thought. Word travels fast in a town like ours, and soon the knocks began at the door. At first, it was Mrs. Carter from across the street, holding out a warm apple pie. "I heard about what happened," she said softly, her eyes full of sympathy. "You're stronger than most would have been." Then came the Johnsons, with a bouquet of late summer flowers cut straight from their garden. They didn't ask for details. They just set the vase on my table and stayed for tea, their laughter filling my kitchen in the gentlest way. Before long, others followed, neighbors, church friends, even the postman, who left a small bag of cookies with a note that read, "You're not alone." Each visit felt like a balm on the bruises of my heart. They reminded me that family isn't always tied by blood. Sometimes it's tied by kindness, by presence, by the willingness to sit at your table and share a story or a slice of pie. The nights grew softer after that. I found joy in the little routines again, tending to my garden, feeding the birds, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea as the sun went down. I laughed more. I slept better. And when the phone rang with his number again, I felt no tug to answer. Not out of anger, but out of acceptance. Some doors once closed are meant to stay shut. One Sunday after church, a neighbor squeezed my hand and said, "You've become something of a heroine around here. You showed all of us what it means to stand up for yourself." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I'm no heroine," I replied. "I'm just a grandmother who finally learned when to say enough." And maybe that was the real lesson. Sacrifice has its place, yes, but it must be met with respect. Otherwise, it isn't sacrifice at all, it's surrender. I had spent years surrendering, but now, in the quiet glow of my little kitchen, surrounded by people who chose to care, I felt whole again. As I sipped my tea that evening, I whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for what I had lost, but for what I had found. Peace, dignity, and a new kind of family, one born not from obligation, but from kindness freely given. And with that, my heart finally rested.